Hey, what's up? I'm Michael. This is my very first paint with me, so thank you for joining me. I hope you have fun. Down below in the description, you will find a link to a line art version of this that you can trace or print on watercolor paper and use if you want. It will have the lines if you print it, or you can trace it. If you trace it, do it in the lightest gray watercolor pencil that you can find. Now, the list of colors used will also be linked below. And what you can do with that is follow along as I show the pencils. I'll go ahead and tell what I'm doing. But that's what that list is for, is so that you can go back and say, okay, this is the color, the exact color that he used, the exact pencil, and you'll understand what's going on. Okay, this is how we are going to do this painting. First, we're going to start off with watercolor pencil. Then we will activate it with water. And then once that is dry, we will go over it with our color pencil to add the details. In the first part here, we're going to be doing the background in 7 different blue colors. I tried to go from the lightest blue up a little bit darker until I got to a more turquoise color, and then I went to a darker blue after that. And let's get to it. First, I used the reference photo linked in the description to do a few sketches of the bird. I changed the suet feeder that the bird was sitting on to a tree limb, and I changed up the background. I also changed the bird slightly in a few spots, mainly the feet. I wanted them to look like they were meeting closer in the back and spreading out in the front around the tree limb. However, the line art I have provided is a digital tracing of the bird from the photo and will slightly differ from my exact one. This way, mine can be unique. You can slightly change yours as well, so it will be unique. Now, let's get to that background. Okay, at this point I am sorting out my blues, and I am going to pick light blue as my first color. What I'm going to do is basically go over the entire background that I want to be blue with light blue first. Now, you can use watercolor for this if you would rather, but I wanted to demonstrate how to do everything with watercolor pencils because not everybody likes to jump straight into a wet medium to start with. At this point, I am trying to outline all of the elements, and then what I can do after I have everything outlined is go back and just lay down that light blue just all over the place really quickly by laying it on its side and going. Now you'll notice at the top of the bird it is a little bit darker, and it's because I'm pressing harder. I'm standing the pencil up a little bit more, and that's because I wanted the background up there to actually be a little bit darker, and you'll see that in the final image, but it gets darker in different spots, and that's why I knew it was going to be darker up there, and I went on and done that. If you want the entire background to be even, you need to keep your pencil at the same pressure and angle the entire time that you're laying down your background color. And basically, I'm still just laying down that color. I'm going to go in here in the tree limb in just a second, and you'll see again that I'm sort of outlining and then going in and filling in. And then under the tree limb, I outline around the bottom, and then I quickly can go through and lay in the rest of that color for that background. Now, I'm not sure if I switch pencils here or not. If I do switch pencils at this point, it's middle phthalo blue, but I don't think I do. I think I went back and just picked up the light blue again, and I just darkened up a few areas by applying a little bit more pressure. At this point, I think is where I went in with the middle phthalo blue. And what I'm doing here is this is the middle phthalo blue. I am actually adding on the left side, sort of covering the whole area, on the bottom covering that whole area. I just changed to light cobalt turquoise as well. Now, on the right side, you see I'm sort of putting in like circles, almost like little blotches. And what I wanted to do was have some blotchy areas on that side. At this point, I am going to cobalt turquoise. Again, just filling in that left side and then in that corner. And then I'm going to go around those other areas, those little spots I talked about. You can see I'm going around the bottom of the tree with this as well. And I'm just trying to lay in just a big range of colors so that once I put the water down, what happens is they all sort of marbleize together. This should be ultramarine. And I'm going to just go straight through with it. And I think I cover the left side, part of the left side, and I start defining a little bit of the darker area on that left side as well, as you can see there. And then I go around these little blotches and sort of add like a shadow area almost. When I go in with the water, it changes it. At this point, I change to cobalt blue and doing the same exact thing, just defining the different areas a little bit better, a little bit different, and I'm gradiating that color in different ways. Now, the final color I use, which is this one here, this is called Hilo Blue Reddish. I call it dark blue. I have no idea why Faber-Castell calls it that, but that is the name, Hilo Blue Reddish. It is a darker blue, and I used it because it was the darkest blue I had, and it was the last blue that I used. And I believe I'm rolling up to the end of laying down the color for the background. Okay, it's time to lay in the colors for that tree. Now, this consists of browns and grays and Indian red. Now, Indian red is a brown or a reddish brown. You want to, if you don't have an Indian red or a reddish brown color, actually have a darker red, sort of a medium red that you can mix with a medium brown color, and you will get an Indian red color. Now, when talking about gray, the higher the number, the darker it is. The lower the number, the lighter. If it is a warm gray, it's going to be more of a brownish gray. If it's a cool gray, it's going to be more of a bluish gray. Okay, I'm going to go in here with Warm Gray 4, which is actually the lighter of the two grays I use on this. And I'm going to shade along the bottom of that limb and the bottom of that second part, and then that upper triangular part. Now I'm going in with Cold Gray 6, which is actually the darker, and I'm going over that, and then I'm sort of going to sketch in some knots and details on the tree. At this point, I'm going to pull out my burnt ochre. At this point, I'm going to apply the burnt ochre all over the entire tree limb. And I'm going to go on and talk ahead of the video slightly because the clip is a little bit shorter at the end. So I'm basically covering the entire limb to lay down a base coat of color, and I am outlining the top and defining the edges of the tree somewhat with this, or the limb somewhat with this color. As soon as this color is done, I'm going to grab that Indian red, which is that reddish brown, and I'm going to go back into certain areas and define the features of the tree. And it's mostly where I put those little gray spots. I'm going to grab it now, and you'll see me throw in just a little bit of features here and there, a few features here and there. Now, after the Indian red has been put in, I'm going to put down a few other just little spots, just speckles of it. I'm going to grab burnt sienna, and with burnt sienna, I'm going to go over a few spots of the tree, and I'm going to like lay it down a little bit to cover a few areas to just give a little bit of coverage of color. But then I'm going to go back and stand it up and put a little more pressure and go around the edges of that Indian red to sort of define those features a little bit more. Now, at that point, once this is done with burnt sienna, I'm going to grab Van Dyke brown, and I'm going to go back and define those edges even more. And I'm going to define those features even more. So, and what I'm basically going to do is go back in with the warm gray 4 here, and I'm going to add in places, shadows, and places of bark that is just gray looking. A lot of trees have gray looking bark on them in certain spots, and then brown in other spots. So then I'm going to grab that Van Dyke brown again, and I'm going to speckle the entire thing with a sort of a bark grain, a wood grain or bark texture. I do that by slightly moving my pencil left and right and just sort of striking the paper every now and then to just get a randomized look to the bark. Okay, now to what we've all been waiting for. Let's get to that bird. Now the colors we'll be using for the bird include browns, grays, black, and in the black we're going to be using a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple. Okay, the first color that we're going to use is light yellow ochre, and we are going to put it around the entire bottom of this bird. His entire belly is going to start with a base coat of it, or a base layer of it. It's okay to color out of the lines if you're going into the background and it's going to help feather it. It's perfectly fine. At this point, I'm putting a little bit in other spots to help highlight. We're switching to burnt ochre at this point, and I'm following the contour lines. And if you look at the reference photo, you can see different lines, sort of like shade and stuff like that. But I've sort of tried to put in a contour line where I wanted it. And once I get that in, I am going to switch to Van Dyke brown, and I'm going to darken up the darkest places on his belly, I should say, the darkest places on his belly, and the shade and the shadow. Okay, we're going to switch to a warm gray 4, which is sort of the medium one. And this is also for shading or shadow. And then we're going to switch to warm gray 1, which is strictly for the highlights at this point. And then back to burnt ochre. And what we're going to do here is just go around a little bit more of the same part of the belly. Now back to warm gray, and we're going to go for the feet at this point. Now I want to do the feet all warm gray 4 to start with, and then we're going to go to cold gray 6, which is the darker gray, and we're actually going to put a little bit of texture on those feet to start with, and the nails. Now we're going for Delft blue after, we're going back to warm gray 4 and then back to cold gray 6 again, and doing the same thing, just layering a little bit more. Then we go for Delft blue, which is a dark purple, and we're going to put that on the nails, and then to Helio blue reddish, which is a dark blue, and put that on the nails. And then over top of those two, we're going to put black over them. And we're back to warm gray 1, which we're going to fill this entire head region in with, because you kind of want to have some sort of color. I mean, you can leave the paper white, but with watercolor as a base, you kind of want to go on and fill most of it in. Now in the eye area, I am going to leave a little spot for the brightest part of his eye. And now we're going to warm gray 4, and we're going to just basically sketch in some of the area around his eye. We're going to sketch in some of that color, and then we're going back to light yellow ochre and putting in that lighter area up under his main part of his face, sort of the top of his neck. Back to cold gray 6, which is the darkest gray that we're using. And what we're going to do with that is go in and define those black areas. Anything that's the black, I want the cold gray up under it, the cold gray 6 up under it first. This will help make it a much richer color when we do it. And then we're going for Van Dyke Brown, and we're going to actually fill in the entire back with Van Dyke Brown. Now this is going to be a little bit different than what we had done in other parts. Once we get to the bottom wing area, you see I start drawing lines, and I put more pressure on it to draw that. We're going back to cold gray 6 to add more of the darker areas and to work on the eye and the beak. And we're going to go to that dark blue, the Halo blue reddish, and then the Delft blue or that dark purple in the beak a little bit and in the eye. And then we're going to go over to black and go over top of that, and then go over top of a lot of that gray that we put in, the darker gray, and we're just putting a little bit of black in lightly to help dense it up and darken it up. Now this is not going to be really, really dark. Now back to the cold gray 6 to put in a few shadow areas in here and a few other darker lines. And we'll go back to black at this point to just put more black over some of those areas. And we're going to go back to that Halo blue reddish dark blue color, and we're actually going to put that around the top of his head to help define some of those feathers a little bit better. And then we're going back to warm gray 1, which is the lightest gray, and we're going to put in a few highlight areas with that one. And once that's done, we're going to come back with our black and actually go ahead and finish up with our watercolor pencils. Now, at this point, you need some brushes or a water brush. You need something, a jar or something with some water in it. And you need a paper towel or an old rag or something like that. And then you will be set to go. Alright, just for this video, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. I'm starting off with the water brush, and I'm just squeezing out some water and starting it off to see how that's going to fill it. However, I'm going to switch to a number 24 round brush. It's a watercolor brush to get the bulk of the background, and you'll see me switch here in just a moment. Here we go. I just dip that right in my water that I cleaned the brush with and go ahead. With watercolor pencil, you can pretty much use that same well of water over and over and over, and it really is not going to matter. You might want to change it every now and then, but you can literally use it over and over. It's not going to be enough paint that comes out of it that really messes the water up. Now, I like to paint up close to the subjects, to the objects. If I'm doing the background, I want to do the background first for a reason. It's sort of a double-edged sword. You can do the background first and then do the the objects in the painting, and it can make it so that the background is already been wet, and the paint is dissolved. And what that means is that when you go in, it's not going to, if you accidentally go out of your subject over the lines, it's not going to mess up as bad. Now, if you watch what I'm doing here, I'm trying to go in certain areas by color and trying to get a marbleized look in a way. And then I'm going down the back of the bird right here. And then I'm going to go back with that larger brush and go over that entire area again, just to make sure I got all of the stuff. Up under his tail, I'm going back with the Waterbrush, and I'm just going to use the entire thing there. Or that entire area, I'm going to use the Waterbrush. And at the bottom, in between the tree limbs, I'm going to use the Waterbrush. And then right up at the bottom of that tree, I'm going to use the Waterbrush as well. And what that's going to do is allow me to get those tight spaces. And then I can come back in with that number 24 round watercolor brush and just go right across that bottom, which you'll see right here. I'll go right across that bottom really quickly, and I'm done. That's all you have to do. As you can see here, I'm going over the wet parts with a hairdryer just to dry everything up before I go in with the next colors. Now here with the water brush, entirely with the water brush for the tree limb, I am going in specific areas first, and then I'm going to go back to those little knots or the details of the tree, and I'm going to go around those by color pretty much in that area, and then go back around it several times in the different parts, just to make sure that I don't mix the wrong colors into the wrong spaces. I want to make sure that I have those details while I mix together the parts that are not supposed to be detailed. It's just supposed to be like a wood grain or something. That's okay to go ahead and just slosh your water through very lightly, of course. But then those detailed areas, the features of the tree as I call them, you want to sort of take your time with that and go around those areas somewhat. Make sure with his toes or his claws or whatever that you're very careful to go around that. And then you want to go up over the tops of the tree first, the limb first, and then over the bottoms of it, because it's darker on the bottom. You always want to work from light to dark. That way you don't contaminate your lights with your dark, if you can do that. If you have to go dark first and then light, always clean your brush out. At this point, I'm using a 3/0 round brush that is a teeny tiny detail brush, and I'm just using it to barely wet certain parts of it so that I can get the detail left in there. I'm going to switch to a 1/8 flat brush as well for certain parts of it, and you'll see that here in just a minute. That is the one with the black handle. The one with the green handle is the 3/0 round brush, and I'm not even sure. I guess it's 3 zeros round or something. I'm not sure. I just happened to see it. With the bird, I want to try to do most of him with these teeny tiny brushes because I want to keep the areas slightly detailed. I don't want to slosh everything together. I do want to have very specific zones. However, as you're going through, where you have drawn the different zones out, if you noticed, I went over specific parts of it with other colors, and that darker gray, because I put that darker gray on there, it's going to still show a little bit. I should have used the warm gray 1. That melts away where you can hardly see it at all. But I'm just basically going through each piece like a paint by number and going through and wetting it down until I have the entire bird wet down. Now, some places where the gray line is still showing through pretty good, if you notice, I'll go through and I will actually apply a little bit more water in that area. I'll apply a little bit more times over it, and what that does is that washes it out a little bit better. And for the larger areas, and it doesn't matter if they blend together as much, I am using the Waterbrush. Now let me tell you a very cool secret to this. If you want to keep the detail, such as the wing, the lines on the wing, or the little parts in his crest up there, go over the darker parts first and don't touch the lighter parts. Once those darker parts are done, which you'll see me do the wings here in a second, and then I'll blow dry it. Once those darker parts are done, like those lines, you can go right back over that when they're dry and go over the lighter parts and still slosh right up against those darker parts. Where those darker parts are already dry, they're not going to pick up the water again. And what that means is that you will keep that detail in there. Now, this is for the pencils that I am using. I cannot guarantee this will work with every single brand of watercolor pencil, but this is one reason I love watercolor pencils. And we're going to blow dry. And there we go with the inside of the wings, the lighter parts. We're going to go through and finish up all of the wet work. And then we're going to let this dry. Be very careful with your details of your eyes, your beak, and stuff like that. And so you know, the eye and the beak have the blue, purple, and black in them. And once that blue and purple sort of activates and it's in that black, it makes it much richer looking, and it makes it look more of a black you would actually see. And that is why I do that way. Okay, here we go. It is time for our details. Now we're going to go in with the color pencil. First we're going to cover the limb, and then we're going to go for the bird. And let's get busy. We're going to start off with warm gray 4, and we're going to cover that little triangular part up there, and we want to do it to where it looks textured, so use the side of the pencil. Then we're going to go through and just add sort of grayish bark in specific places, just random places, sort of to the bottom of the limb as well. We're going for burnt ochre at this point, and we're pretty much going over most of it, just sort of giving it a texture to the whole thing. Besides, I don't think I put it on the features of the tree. Then we're going for Van Dyke Brown, and with Van Dyke Brown, we're just going to go in and sort of add a few more details, but we're also going to, in certain areas, go on and put a little bit of that darker texture down. As you can see here, I'm defining those features of the tree, those knots. And if you'll notice, after the knots, I'm sort of putting a little, what I call a little funnel shape or a siphon shape out of it. It makes it more 3D to me to do that. There's a knot on the bottom of the tree as well, or the bottom of the limb as well. And what I'm doing there is I will define that a little bit better. I'm going across the bottom and of the limbs in certain places with that color, and I'm going to darken that up as well to make it stand out from that background a little bit. And as you can see, I'm going back around some of those areas again, those other details. And here in a second, here I'm going across that bottom to define that. But here in a second, I'll also add another knot that was not there to start with to the right side of the limb. And also at this point, what I'm doing is I'm going in with that same method of that sort of skip around, just doing my pencil left and right and putting in a bark texture. If you look at a tree limb or tree bark, they have it has little texture here and there from the shadow in it, and that's what that looks like to me. Is by doing that, it gives it that texture that I like for that look. As you can see, I just put that little knot on the bottom part of that hump of it. These are called burls, but this is supposed to be just a little tree limb, so it's just a tiny little knot burl in there. And again, I'm defining that edge to try to make it a little sharper, and then I'm going right up above that just a little bit in certain parts to try to give it a little bit more shade look, a little shadow look, to define the shape of it a little bit, to make it look a little bit more round. We're switching to Indian red at this point, and we're putting a few of those little marks in, and we're going to define a little bit more in those other areas that was already, that had the Indian red. Now we're going to go to a dark gray. This is a different type of pencil, but it's a dark gray. I wanted to try it. We're starting on the bird, and we're going to fix his feet to where we want to have his feet where the nails are the exact right look, and then his feet have the texture, the bumpy look, and then these little texture lines, these little shadow lines. And we're doing that with dark gray, then warm gray 4, and then the dark gray again, and then with black. And that's going over his feet. And then we're going up with the black to his beak here. And I'm also using black in the other pencil brand as well because it's sharper at this point. I'm using it in his eye. And what we're going to do at this point, we're going to go back and grab that dark purple color, and we're going to go into his eye and put that in there. And then we're going to grab that dark blue color and put that back in his eye a little bit. And then go back to that black and sort of go over it all. And to concentrate, I have to stick my tongue out just right. You got to learn to stick your tongue out just perfectly right, or you'll never get it. I am a jokester, so you'll have to forgive me. Now with the black, I'm going to be going around all of the areas that I put the darker grays and the blacks in with the watercolors, and I'm going to be defining them. For his crest, I'm doing sort of a really short zigzag on every single one of those little areas, those little black plumes that go up, to give it, if you look at it up close, it's got a little zigzag going. I made them more of a horizontal zigzag, whereas in the actual image, it's more of a diagonal to vertical zigzag. As I said, I did change the bird slightly the way I want it to. I'm going back to that dark gray to add a few details here and there and darken up a few different spots. If you see me hold down the paper or put my 2 fingers down, what I'm doing is actually trying to hold the paper flat because the watercolor buckled it up enough and it did not flatten back out like it usually does. I also used a tortillon there to actually sort of blend some of that gray out in that part of the wing where I put the darker gray. Now, we are going to, I believe at this point, we're going to jump to looks like we're going back to black. And no, this is actually Van Dyke brown. And then back to the black. The Van Dyke brown defined the initial little feather area there, and then the black actually goes in and it darkens it up a little bit. So I wanted the brown up under it. When I wrote it down, I must have missed a little bit. This is light yellow ochre, and I'm going over the entire belly with this, and I'm just putting little strokes, and it makes it look like feathers. And then we're going to burnt ochre. We're going to do the same thing, basically follow the same areas that we did before. And I believe before I missed it, but I did use a Prismacolor white to add a few highlighted areas. Now, again, this is the burnt ochre, and the burnt ochre, like I said, it's going over that entire bottom area as well to add an extra little tone. So you get like a dual tone. It's almost like a yellow brown and an orange brown together, and it really makes it pop. Then we're going to Van Dyke brown again. And with Van Dyke brown, we're going to really darken up that chest. We're going to darken up the shadow areas as well. Any area that is shadowed at all, I really want that Van Dyke brown in, because that is the color that really makes it look like it's shadowed. On his upper wings, the entire things are Van Dyke brown. I go over all of them, but the way that I do it is I draw lines basically and try to make those shapes so that it looks like that you can see a form in there. And I make those lines so that they look like feathers as well. And we're going to go back for a warm gray 4, which is that lighter middle tone gray. And I'm putting in some feather detail in his face there. I'm going to go around the eye area and put in those little strokes all over, and it makes it look like he's got a lot of feathers on his face. And in that entire little gray area, I do that. When we get to the back of his head, I start making them much longer, and it makes it look much better there. Now, around that eye, they are really short. Then in the plume, I also make the longer ones that follow that contour. Back to the Prismacolor white, and this is going to just highlight up a lot of those areas. Anywhere I put this is basically for a highlight or a really light area. And we're going to even embellish that a little bit more with a Jelly Roll white gel ink pen. And we put the highlight in his eye, and we went up through his crest with that to add a few more extra white areas. And we're going to finish with Van Dyke brown. And we're just going to add a little bit more shadow, and we're fluffing out his little butt area there. And that's because it's fluffy like that in the picture. So we want to fluff that out. We want to add that extra shadow, and we are done. Let's sign it. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. If you liked this, please check out some of my other videos. Leave a like and subscribe. It'll greatly help me out on my channel. Also, please comment what other types of projects and videos you'd like to see. The more feedback I get, the better I can do for you, the more stuff I can make that you'll actually like. That's all for now, and I will see you later. Y'all have a great time. Hey, I'm Michael. Thank you for watching my video. If you'd like to know or see more, I have links in the description, and I have more video content over here. See you later.